Good evening. It's Joyful Christian Hermit, and I want to give you this good news. I found this little book online, downloaded for free, bigger print than what I have here. But I thought I would read a little bit of this chapter on suffering just to give a flavor of it. Truly, I think I have learned the most of a lot of how to suffer, the theology of suffering, union with God through suffering, the honor of suffering, the vocation of suffering, through others who have suffered tremendously and understood that it was a call, even being chosen, depending on the extent of the suffering. If it was life-altering suffering, especially, reading about it really helped. Taking tips from people through the centuries, really, way back. And those who wrote about those who suffered. Another one that I thought of is Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi. She suffered a great deal. She was a stigmatic also. But not all of these were stigmatics. Some or religious. But a lot of the books that are written, in that go more deep into the topic of suffering are. But again, in the 20th century, we have Therese Neumann, but she was a stigmatic. I'm thinking of those who suffered and wrote about it, wrote about their tremendous love, or their life was written about the suffering they did and the benefits, like Padre Pio. He was a victim soul, and more in recent times. He died in 1968. So we have a lot of his, if you get his volumes of letters, we understand more his suffering and how he united with Christ through the suffering. And it was, he had suffered already a great deal in life, even as a child off and on. But he received the stigmata as a sign, sort of as a commitment, signal of his suffering, of his willingness to suffer. It happened shortly after he finally went to the monastery, went to San Giovanni Rotondo, after dreading going, and various illnesses, though, seriously kept him away. But finally it worked out that they were able to get him there. And then he had that St. Michael, they feel it probably was, bright light, spears. They were like spears of light. So pierced him in all of the wound areas. So very miraculous. But those things generally don't happen. But there have been other instances of suffering, tremendous suffering. Simone Weil, a Jewish young woman who was very interested, and she became ill, though, because she stopped eating. She went on a tremendous fast, wanting to experience what the ones in the camps were going through. And so that was a little different story. She was going to convert to Catholicism, but didn't in the end. She decided that staying with her birth religion was what she needed to do. But she was a poet. Anyway, there's others more current times that you can find, but I find best the ones that are older, at least 100 years old. That Alexandrina was a very touching story, and how she came to accept the suffering and utilized it for good. That's the main thing, is to, it's here, it's with us, And what are we going to do? Well, we can choose. Offer ourselves to God for Him to use us as He wills, which often means more suffering. I have had increasing sufferings, not just physical, since I understood that first priest who explained to me I was a victim soul. And he was right. So the first book I read was The Way of Divine Love, Josefa Menendez, Servant of God, Josefa Menendez. And that was very impactful. In fact, it frightened me in a way. The responsibility of it frightened me. But I was afraid I was going to get the stigmata. And I did not want that. I did not want to be noticed or anything like that. So, and I had children, and and God didn't give that. For a while, off and on, it hasn't been for a while, but for a while I did have interior stigmata in my feet, in my hands, in my side. And I had a strange experience once where two strangers were at Mass. It would have been back in about maybe 1997 on a Saturday morning Mass. No one had seen them before. I asked the priest if he'd ever seen them after they left, but they waited after Mass. I was praying. They wanted to talk with me. And the one knew exactly where my wounds were, my interior stigmata. It was very bizarre. I think they were angels, as it turned out. And then all of a sudden they wanted to leave. They fled out the doors of the church because I invited them to come have breakfast at my home. I thought, well, I should entertain the angels, but they said, oh, no, we don't want to get locked in. Well, of course they wouldn't have. The doors don't lock from the inside out. You can get out, but, and they weren't locked, but that was the excuse they used. But that was a most bizarre experience for me. And the one said that even before Mass, when I was praying up at the railing, I was on my knees praying. I was having a lot of pain that day. I didn't have medication then. And afterwards, when they waited and waited till everybody else left and wanted to talk to me, and I sensed they did. I sensed that it was strange. But the one even said, the amount of pain in your body, she said it was all I could do to keep from vomiting, from all the pain that you carry. And I realized that by then that was already 12 years into my suffering. And it was increasing, of course, that I had adapted increasingly to it, but that others wouldn't be able to cope if they had my pain in their body. They wouldn't be able to deal with it, just boom into them. And I had my godmother at that time, and called the priest who, did you know these people, and told him what had happened. And then, I guess it was the assistant priest, and then he had never seen them and found it odd. One was from Korea, and the other one was from Africa, she said. So, we didn't often see that combination in the little hometown in the Midwest, but, and didn't never saw them again. But, and I followed them out, but I couldn't even see them then. It was like they just disappeared. I didn't see any cars on the street or anyone getting into a car to drive off. So, and then the godmother said that God sent them as affirmation to me and as encouragement that of the amount of suffering I had, so that I wouldn't feel like, I wasn't doing well enough with it. Because, I would cry, and when I would have the pain sieges especially, it was really rugged. And I think it was a blessing when I got here and God provided pain medication for me, finally, in adequate amounts, because I think He knew I was at the point of wearing down, unable to handle that level of pain that kept increasing. So, anyway, it's if you read these victim soul books, it gives you the full understanding, in a way, of what it is and of the agreement. And I gave my full agreement to God. I wrote my vow of suffering. Later I did, but earlier on I accepted what God asked of me. And even that summer that I was becoming Catholic, about a month before I became confirmed, I was awakened that one morning, and I couldn't see the figure, but I was some large figure. I could tell, but this voice, very commanding, a pronouncement, "Lo and behold, by the power of this locution, your suffering and the sufferings of Holy Mother Church shall be made one." And so that was like, I didn't know what was Holy Mother Church, and like, oh my goodness, And seeing mortification written in the night of my room a couple years before I became Catholic, and then I woke up on the island one time, reminded, and I had woken up before one other time when I was having a pain siege, and I was being told, "Be an immolation, be an immolation." And that happened again on the island. I needed the reminder that God had asked me to be an immolation for His love. And so I find it best, if you have irreversible suffering, no cure for it, to consider these things seriously and pray and offer yourself fully to God. I had already offered myself fully, even before I became Catholic, because, Lord, to whom shall I go? What was I going to do? I was ruined by that back surgery. And He sent me back to rear my children and fulfill my mission, but He didn't tell me that would be a life of constant debilitating suffering. And I didn't know it was going to worsen either. That one neurosurgeon who said it would get worse as I got older, well, my attitude on that was, well, we'll see. I didn't tell him that, but I thought, well, this is just his opinion. I've heard other doctors, even my surgeon at first thought I, would get better. And he had me checked out psychologically, and had my pain level tested to see, what my pain tolerance was. And when he found out I had an extremely high tolerance, so high, the man who was running the tests, he started a crisis. "I can't put this up any higher." He said, your pain tolerance is off the charts. He says, I've grown men, when I have less than what I have for you, who are screaming for me to stop. I was still handling it. So I knew that I had, and then when times when I couldn't handle the pain, I knew I had a whole lot of pain. I knew God was helping me cope. Plus, I had to keep going for my children. what a mother won't do for her children. So, and even when I would falter with them and cry out with the pain, and didn't mean to, but I couldn't help it at certain points when the pain would get so bad. And especially, when it get around my head, I called it the crown of thorns pain. Around the head was just excruciating. But this pump in me has given me relief. I don't have that severe of head pain sieges anymore. So, God can do with us as he wills. And I just figure he keeps me here, suffering and offering my suffering and praying, and my suffering is made one with the sufferings of the church, of which there's a lot of suffering in the church. And who knows what he has for you? Even temporary suffering. That's why in my blog, I write about make an offering of yourself, even in temporary suffering. Like if you have a sinus infection that goes on for 6, it's probably going to be 8 weeks before I'm out of this thing. I don't know. If this is connected with my blood issues, then maybe it's just going to be a continuous sinus problem. I don't know. And whatever God wills, it's, I've already mentioned how I see myself at times. And it's nothing that I created of myself. It was just in my mind of me hooked up with tubes and wires to God. And the pain just flowed between us, It would come through me and back to God for his use. It was odd, but it was an image that made sense to me. That he was letting me know my suffering is being utilized in ways that we don't have to understand and we don't have to know. On occasion, he's let me know, but I don't bother anymore asking. I just figure it's enough for me to hang in here, suffering, and to have as good an attitude as possible. Because it does no one good, not my dogs either, if I'm upset or if I'm, not relaxed with the suffering. If you tense up, it hurts even more. So, suffering is very real. The connection of suffering with Christ and his suffering is very real. And there's that scripture, to make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Well, that's been explained in books, theology about that. And I no longer get into the weeds. I keep it simple. I just do what I've offered now for years ago. I've offered myself. When I understood what mortification was, when I understood what being an immolation was, when I understood victim soul, and some dreams I had. The one where the angel said, well, you've agreed to this. I was complaining terribly with the suffering. And she says, you've agreed to this. And yes, I had. So, I just stick with part of it, with the beauty of it, the mystery of it. And I don't worry, I don't get into the intellect too much with it. God knows what he's doing. I did have all that, Dr. H years ago, the first surgeon, he thought, well, maybe it was in my head, that I wasn't improving, that I had all this pain after the surgery. And so I said, I said, this clinical psychologist has been coming to my home doing all kinds of therapies to try to help me with the pain. So he called Dr. H, and they talked, and my surgeon apologized to me. He says, I didn't realize, but he still had me go through the pain tolerance testing. He wanted to know, just where was my pain tolerance. But since then, and I've discussed this with the physical therapist, God has taught me how to use the mind a lot. But even I think more than the mind, but I don't get into it too deep with the physical therapist, is using the heart and the soul. It's the love. To have great love for Christ. And that helps with the suffering. Because just as I was a mother and was willing to undergo whatever for my children, I would push through to, have their birthdays or whatever. Then I would collapse for a few days, or go to something special that they had, try to. And then I would deal with the pain sieges after. So, and it's even more so with love of Christ. And he then gives us the ability to endure whatever sufferings. But my sufferings are rooted in a physiological problem. There's a cause, a material cause. Arachnoiditis. My arachnoid membrane in my spinal cord was either slit or punctured, either with an injection a couple of days prior to the emergency surgery with medical liquid that they use. I'm trying to think. I can't think of the name of it. I had it the other day in a video. But it was bad. And all of that prior, myelogram, the fluid they used for myelogram in 1987 still would cause arachnoiditis. They have found now. After 1988, they changed the medication they used for myelograms, the dye. They changed the dye. And so people they didn't get arachnoiditis after 1988 from a myelogram. And I don't know if they knew at the time it was causing arachnoiditis. They just happened to change the dye, I think. But it could have also been the rushing of the second surgery. But in this little book, this chapter on union with God through suffering, and I'll write in the description the place where you can go online to get this whole little book on self-renunciation. He discusses every soul has a secret yearning to him as its creator, the source of its being, and further still, union with Christ is the highest aspiration of every mind, quickened by the Holy Spirit to a sense of the spiritual world. All prayer, meditation, and communion has this object for its end. For so far all is well, but many who seek after this union fall into the error of supposing it to consist of naught save sweetness and illumination, wherein their part is solely one of enjoyment. In a measure this is true. The blessedness of union with God is sweeter than all conceivable delights, but at the same time it is inseparably bound up with pain and suffering, however these may be tempered by his grace. Nor are these external sufferings but rather those interior trials which penetrate to the very depths of the soul. So it can be suffering of all types, not always external pain. I've had tremendous spiritual sufferings. Those are the hardest, the most horrible of sufferings, but also the most beautiful in offering to God. Because each time we get through a spiritual suffering or a mental or an emotional suffering, we're that much closer to God. We understand God all the more. We understand all the more what Christ went through on the cross and on earth with his persecutions and people wanting to kill him when he was just doing good. He was God. Perfection. So, healing people, and still the envy, the resentment, the fear of him, and the call out to get him killed. They wanted to kill him. So even in his hometown, they rejected him and were going to throw him over a cliff. But he walked through their midst, walked right through their midst. They were unable to fulfill that. So whoever would attain to union with God must accept the truth that suffering and loss are imperative conditions of any such blessings. So this goes on to talk more, that chapter on union with God and suffering. But for those of you who suffer a great deal and life-altering, like I think it's RT7 or something like that is written in, at some point, and we don't even realize it, maybe we have somehow wanted union with God or something. It happens, and it's okay. It will all work out. Will all work out. So, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Even though people may not understand or grasp, and others may not either. But all that matters is the person who has offered him or herself to God and who is accepting and embracing the suffering. And then we go from there in God's grace, in love, in trust, in faith, and God takes it from there. So I'll put this where you can find this online under the description of my little chit chat tonight. I'm not going to say much. I may have to take off a little bit, get my throat back. God bless you all. God love you all.